Next up, let's take a look at two initial approaches to getting documents back out of Couchbase through Ottoman. We'll take a look at the getById operation as well as the generic find. Before we get there though, let's follow up on a topic introduced in the last lesson, which is that Ottoman manages your indices for you. Let's see how this works. Well, first, we've already seen that when you open a bucket, you need to assign it to the bucket property of Ottoman. What happens from that point is that you would call Ottoman.ensure indices. What this does is introspects your Ottoman instance for any indexes that need to be created. Now that's going to be the primary index for the bucket, as well as any model-defined indexes that you may have added to a particular model. We'll look at those in a later lesson. If there's an error in creating or verifying the index, you would get an error back and you could return it as appropriate. But once ensure indices runs, for example, on the first execution of your app, you would see the indexes created for your particular bucket. So as here, we see that the primary index has been created for customer 360 ODM. Again, in a later lesson, we're going to look at model-defined indexes, and you would see those here as well. So we have the getById operation, and we've seen that each model defines its own ID attribute. Now the ID is not the document key or document ID. We've seen that the document ID is comprised of the model type along with the ID. However, the getById operation loads the model by the model ID alone, not the document key. So if I had username as my ID and a username were passed into my get operation as we see here, I would pass just the username to the getById for my customer, and then under the hood it wraps it up as a get operation for this model, and it does do a get by document key. So it is extremely fast, like a regular get operation, but it allows you to focus on the IDs that you've provided for your models. There's also what we call a generic find operation. We've seen that our models can define any number of arbitrarily named and typed values. The generic find searches for matching documents based on some arbitrarily chosen attribute. So for example, if my model, my country model as I see here, has an attribute country name, I could assemble based on input through my get operation, which might pass in a country name. I could assemble a JSON snippet matching that attribute and pass that snippet to the generic find operation for my country model, and it would bring back all documents for countries matching that particular name. Now, this is implemented under the hood as a nickel query, and if you've taken our nickel course, you can understand how that might work. It is flexible because it allows you to look up arbitrary attributes without planning your indexing in advance. However, if you don't plan your indexing in advance, well, your performance is only going to be as good as the primary index for your bucket. Or said differently, in a later lesson we're going to see that you can tell Ottoman to create or verify the existence of a particular index for a particular attribute if you choose. That's not happening here. This is a flexible approach that lets you arbitrarily pass back searches against arbitrary attributes either for ad hoc querying or because you may have externally defined a secondary index for this attribute already for the particular bucket and data set that you're working with. The key takeaway is this approach does not create an index for you. We'll look at that later. In the lab for this module, we'll have you load a model by its ID. You'll also be ensuring that indexes are created, and you'll also work with a generic find operation to find by an arbitrary attribute value. Who knows, you may get crazy and try it with a few other attributes as well. When you're done, come on back. We want to jump into the topic of embedding versus referencing documents and how that's reflected within your Ottoman model. Stick around.